Okay, so let me begin. So today I'm going to talk to you about leveling up your gamification to solve big business problems, okay? So Gabe always give me a very challenging task of giving extremely short talks, like 22 minutes. Last time when I speak at the Gamification Summit, I tried to cram everything into the time he allotted to me, and that was not very good, I would say. It's not. I look at it, and I talk like I'm firing a machine gun. So today, I'm going to take a completely different approach. Basically, I take one concept out of a 4-hour workshop that I typically give, and I'm just going to go deep in that concept. Okay? So simplicity, right? You heard BJ Fogg say simplicity drives behavior. So hopefully, that would drive some learning here by being simple. So let me begin by asking you some little gamification trivia, because I know there's a lot of gamification practitioners here. So what is the 3 most common business use case of gamification? So I know gamification can be used in pretty much anything, right? Education, health and fitness, civic engagement. Let's talk about business. What are the 3 most common business use case? Shout it out. Training, call center, sales. Okay, very good. These are all some variant, pretty close. Okay, so basically they are deepen engagement, sustain loyalty, and also onboarding users. So the training would be onboarding new user, right? And sustain, all the collaborations would be engagement. And in that case, it would be engagement between employees, right? So these have both application internally and externally, right? So internally, we are talking about collaboration among employees and loyalty to a company, right? And then also like employee onboarding, right? So there is also an external application of this where the player are essentially customers, right? So now you're actually driving customer engagement and loyalty to a brand and basically teaching the user how to use your product better, okay? So let me ask you guys, how well are these kind of applications working for you guys? Are they working well? No problem at all? So-so? How many say it's working really well? Nobody? Dude, why are you guys here? Okay, all right, so how many say it doesn't work? Okay. So let me do a little experiment, okay? So let me ask you guys, do you participate in any travel-based loyalty program? Okay, keep your hand raised, okay? Pretty much everybody have some loyalty program, right? Travel-based means hotel or airline. Keep your hand raised, okay? Now, I actually did this survey, and then it turns out that actually pretty much everybody have a loyalty program. Now, keep your hand raised. Next question. Do you have more than one loyalty program? Keep your hands raised if you have more than one. Okay. None of you are very loyal. If you participate in more than one, you're loyal to none. To none, right? You're not really loyal. So it turns out that this is exactly the data that I've seen, right? Basically, the difference between this case and this case is really only 10%. Only 10% of the people are truly loyal to a loyalty program, right? The rest of it is just collecting points and gaining levels because they're convenient. All right? So, okay. So gamification, had been used, to drive loyalty, but it sounds easy, but it's actually not, right? So you heard earlier, from Gartner that, and actually this is a report that they published, saying that 80% of the currently gamified application will fail to meet business need. 80% failure. Okay, very, very serious problem, right? So the main problem is that most games actually have an end, right? Most games don't last forever. Okay, so people actually won't and actually cannot, and can't actually play continuously forever. They just don't have that time or energy to actually to do that, right? But the problem is that most of the business problem that we're trying to solve don't really have an end, right? They are long term, okay? So, but we also know that good games are really, really engaging. Some great games are even addictive, right? So let's take a look at one very kind of addictive game, very successful addictive game, and trying to analyze it and see what we can learn from that, right? So let's take a look at Angry Bird, right? What do Angry Bird has? Well, there's some immediate feedback, right? So there's basically, these are control, right? You can aim the birds, right? And there's physics, right? You can knock stuff down, right? These are all immediate, right? If I kick this monitor here, it's going to fall down. And I'm going to notice it immediately. I'm not going to kick it because those people will not be very happy with me. All right. So there's also points, right? They're basically immediate feedbacks. Immediately you knock something down, you're going to get some points, right? And then there's level up and unlocks, right? And then there's challenges, right? And there's different type of challenge with different birds that knocks down different kind of material. And then you also have different kind of pig. You get different amount of points for doing that. And finally, there's also like, a leaderboard, for you to compare how you perform to your friends. Okay? So with all this kind of leveling structure, right, what it does is that it brings a user into a state of flow. Right? You heard what flow is. How many people don't know what flow is? Okay, most of you do, so I'm going to go through this very quickly, right? So flow is this optimal state of intrinsic motivation, okay? And people tend to forget about everything, right? They're absorbed in what they do, right? And so the key here is that you actually need to have the challenge that you face match the skill that you have to get into that state. Right, that's actually very important, and it's actually a very fine line because if here the skill is high compared to the challenge that you face, then you get into this boredom state, right? And if you like kind of a little bit arousal, if the challenge is too high and your skill is not high enough, then you get frustrated, right? So that's the notion of flow, right? So it's a fine line, right? Certainty versus uncertainty. People love to be in control, but if everything is so in control that they could do it with their eyes closed, then it's kind of boring, right? And and arousal, right, the same thing, right? People like to be a little bit aroused, but if they are frustrated, they can't do it, it's too challenging, then they get frustrated, right? So it's this fine line. But what people often don't remember is that people actually are not static, right? Their skill actually changes over time. They get better at what they do, right? So even if you are in the state of flow right now, over time, because you get better at what you do, so you move into this boredom state, right? So very simply, to get you back into flow, you just have to find a task that's a little bit more challenging, all right? But in real life, it's actually very difficult to find a task that's just with the right amount of challenge that move you right back into flow. It's very hard to find a task that exactly does that, right? It's usually more the same thing, so it's still kind of boring, right? Or it's kind of something that's way too hard, right? So you get a little bit frustrated, right? But if it's just a little bit too hard, it's probably okay because you just have to learn a little bit more skill, acquire a little bit more skill, basically learn a little bit, right? Do a little bit of learning, so there's a shallow learning curve, and then you move right back to flow, all right? And then if it's way too hard, then you have a steep learning curve, and it takes you a long time to get back to flow. That's why people don't usually move into this flow state, but if they do, they're very intrinsically motivated. Okay. So now, how do you get into flow? You know this flow state. How do you actually get into it? Any guess? Well, you flow right in? Okay. Well, so we know that flow is this narrow zone between kind of boredom and frustration, right? So how do you maintain to stay in that zone? Well, one very simple way is basically just zigzag along that, right? Right? Very simple, right? So what are you doing when you're zigzagging along this zone of optimal intrinsic motivation? What are you actually doing there? What you are doing is that you are, as a game designer, as designers here, this is the design track, right? So you all are, hopefully, will design something leaving here. But you want to design in such a way that you control the level of difficulty, right here, such that every step that the player takes, it's a baby step relative to the skill he already acquired. Okay, that's actually very important here. This is the key important. This is a very, very key point right here. Okay, every step that the user take had to be a baby step relative to the skill they already acquired. What does that mean? So you can say that, well, if I play it can't be every step is easy, right? Because it actually gets kind of boring after a while, right? But I'm not saying that. I'm saying that relative to the skill that they acquire. So what does that mean? So this could be a next step, right? And if you look at this graph, it could be actually a very big step. It could be very, very challenging, right? But relative to the skill that you already acquire, that step looks like a baby step, right? So now imagine you're playing like Angry Bird level 100, right? If you never play Angry Bird level at all, right? Angry Bird level 100 would look like, oh my God, this is something like, how did I ever play this, right? This is impossible, right? It will look really, really hard, right? But after you play level 1 to level 99, all of a sudden, level 100 looks really, really easy. Okay? So that is the key to drive behavioral addiction. That is the key to drive behavioral addiction. Okay? Because every next step that you're going to take, you feel like it's really easy. I could do it, right? Every next step, right? Relative to as you play, you gain more and more skill. You learn more and more, right? So every next step that the person have to take, the player have to take, looks really easy. So he continued to take that next step, right? So he continued to play, continued to be engaged, right? That is the key. All right. Now, so today, so that's how they design really addictive games, right? So how do we use this principle to design gamification strategies with existing tools out there to solve really, really big business problem, right? So there are lots of tools out there, okay? So I'm not going to be able to list them all here, but let's just pick a few, representative tools here. There's points, badges, leaderboard, there are different kinds of rank and reputation, all that, right? So all these tools, like, how do you know which one to use to tackle a particular business problem? Okay? So the thing that I find with all these tools is that they're not random. They actually fall into something what I call a gamification spectrum. Okay? Now this spectrum ranges from really, really short kind of feedback time scale, right? Points are, like I said, it's immediate, right? And badges, you kind of take a little bit longer time scale to feedback to you because you have to get enough points to get to the threshold in order to get the badge, right? And then leaderboard took a little bit even longer feedback time scale, right? And then you have trophies, you have ranks, you have these are not the only gamification tools out there. There's like literally hundreds of them, right? There's goals, missions. I'm not listing all the gamification tools here. There are many, many more than I could list. Right? You'll fill up the screen. You wouldn't be able to see anything. So these are just representative ones. All right? So let's see what are some of the properties of these tools. Okay, so short and immediate feedback tools, right? So these are, so the feedback time scale is really how quickly does the gamification tool feedback your performance to the player. Right? So with the points is immediate, right? So one of the properties that, typically when you're dealing with the really short feedback time scale, the behavior that you're trying to gamify is typically a single action. One simple action, right? And the metric that you use is usually some counting metric, some accumulation of events or action that you took, right? But as you kind of move into this longer feedback time scale, you start to, track multiple actions. Maybe to get a trophy, you need to do several things, not just one action, right? Have to do several things several different times, right? In order to get a trophy and ranks and portable reputation, team reputation, these are even longer. So now you not only have to be the one user who achieved that action, your whole team, a group of users have to achieve that. So it's actually much, much harder to get these. So that's why they are much longer feedback time scale. All right? So here you may start to use reciprocity metric. It's no longer what you did that matters. It's what other people's reaction to what you do that matters. Okay? So that's the longer time scale of feedback. Okay. So typically the ones that are with short feedback time scale, they're actually pretty biased, right? They're not really fair. So typically they're feedback to the user themselves, right? Because the person who plays the game longer obviously he's going to get more points or more badges, right? So it's not really a fair comparison for people, right? So they're less kind of fair, so they're more biased. So they're more intended to kind of feed back to the user himself. But when you get to the longer timescale tools, they are more fair, so they actually feed back to the entire community, the group, right, or beyond that. Okay, so now because these short timescale feedback tools, right, they typically gamify a single user, single action. That means the user have full control of what they do, right? So that means they can be gamed pretty easily, right? Because they have full control of all the metric, right? I could go out and retweet and follow a million people, right? And retweet anyone, or spend the weekend doing all that, right? So it's easy to game, but here it's actually very difficult to game because it's no longer what you do that matters. It's actually what other people do, other people's reaction to you that actually matters. So it becomes much more difficult to game that system, right? And also, what's interesting is that, like, because of that, right, these short kind of feedback timescale tools, they are very extrinsic, right? And here, the long feedback timescale tools are much more intrinsic. There's value, right? When you actually achieve a team kind of reputation, that means something special and unique to you, okay? So here, because these are extrinsic, they're actually not sustainable long term, right? People will get badges, right? How many people here use Foursquare? How many people have ever used Foursquare? A lot of you, a lot more of you, right? Why did you guys stop? Because after you get 100 badge, the marginal value of the extra badge is minimal, right? It's no longer not that valuable, so it's not really sustainable, right? Whereas these kind of long feedback timescale tools, they are much more sustainable long term, right? So these are easy to implement in the short timescale. That's why a lot of kind of vendors tend to focus on these easier to implement solutions, right? Where these tend to be on the right-hand side tend to be much more difficult to implement. Okay. So you could think of these tools with short and immediate kind of feedback as some games that are really easy to achieve. And think of these long feedback timescale tools as a game that's really hard to achieve, really hard to play, right? So as a result, the immediate feedback tools typically motivates user much more quickly, right? You get the feedback right away, so it's motivating for you, right? Whereas but you also know from flow that if it's easy, it's an easy game, you also master it quickly, right? You master the game quickly. That means you're going to get bored very quickly. On the other extreme, right? So these tools are really hard to master. It takes a long time to master it, to get good at it, right? But then because they're so hard that most people will find it frustrating and very few people actually play, right? So you have a problem here, right? You have the easy game that's very easy to play, very motivating, quick to motivate, but people also get tired of it quickly. And you have the hard games that are challenging, but very few people play it. So what do you do? What do you do there? Think about this. Remember, learn from the game designers, right? So what you do is that you build a ladder, right? So you can start with immediate feedback, such as points, right? And once people get a few points and stuff like that, then you could implement badges, and after you get like 5 or 10 badges, then you start comparing them to their peer. You have leaderboards, then you have trophies, ranks, and then you essentially build this ladder up. That make sense? Okay. So how do you use gamification to solve big business problem? Well, what kind of business problem are there? Right? So first thing you have to do is that you have to identify what is the effective timescale of your game. Right? When you're trying to gamify something in business, you are trying to change the behavior of some player. Right? This player can be employees, could be customers, could be somebody. Right? So you have to identify essentially the effective timescale. So what is this effective timescale? You heard about feedback timescale. Feedback timescale is not the same thing as effective timescale. Effective timescale is how long the gamified behavior will last, or at least intended to. Okay? Now, let's take a look at some business problem that you can solve with gamification, right? Let's say if you're trying to gamify conference participation at this conference, right? So how long does the conference last? Typically, 3 day, 4 day, right? Right? On the order of days, right? What if you're trying to gamify employee onboarding? How long does it typically take to onboard an employee? Different companies, different, right? Some maybe a few weeks, some maybe a few months, right? So that's the effective time scale of the game, right? What about a marketing campaign? A marketing campaign typically lasts a few months, probably, right? And what if you're trying to gamify community co-creation? If you have an open source project. Yeah, on the order of probably years, right? What about loyalty? Loyalty to both the brand or a company, right? So depending on which player you're trying to gamify, right? So these are big problems that will require many, many years. Many, many years, right? So what you need to do is that, you already learned that tools with short feedback time scale have faster effect, but they also extinct faster, right? They have faster extinction period, right? So people get bored of it. So what you need to do is that you build a ladder with successively longer feedback time scale, right? So you always start with immediate feedback, right? And you end with the effective time scale of your game, okay? And then basically with conference, points and badges are good enough. It's actually very good, With employee onboarding, depending on how long it takes, right? Point badges and leaderboard actually will do the job pretty well, right? And then marketing campaign, you need a little bit longer. You need to build a lot. The key is that you must fill in everything in between. You can't skip any rung, right? If you skip a rung, you create this gap that makes people really hard to climb, right? Okay, all right. So today, most hotel and airline loyalty program, they have these kind of, they have points. Essentially, they're miles, right? And they also have these, status like, silver, gold, platinum, diamond, whatever you want to call it, right? But effectively, these are really just badges, right? I mean, you can call it anything you want, but effectively, to the user, the feedback is like a badge, right? Because it's a single action. The action is to fly, right? And you get to accumulation of a certain point, and you get that status, right? So make no mistake. Loyalty program today does work, okay? It does work. It does drive repeat purchase, and it does increase usage and therefore increase revenue. But it could have worked way much better, right, if you have this leveling up structure, okay? So what is the formula to solve big business problem, right? One is that you must identify the effective timescale of your desired behavior change, right? So is that on the order of a few weeks, or is it on the order of 2 year, or 3 year, or 10 year, right? How long is it? And then you have to find a gamification tool with the feedback time scale that matches your effective time scale, right? So I'm not going to tell you what these are, right? Because there are literally hundreds of tools out there. Hundreds of tools, right? And then what you need to do is you build a ladder by filling in the gaps with tools that have successively longer feedback time scale, right? So and you always start with something immediate, right? Like I said, it could start with points. It doesn't have to be point. There are other things that are immediate feedback to the user as well, right? So these are, like I said, these are representative kind of tool sets, right? I mean, they don't have to use there's literally 100 of them to select from, right? And then finally, you must fill the gaps, right? So that the ladder is actually easy to climb, so that people will want to climb the next rung, right? But the key is that you actually do not need to fill all the rungs at the beginning. You can actually fill the rung as you go, right? All you need to do is fill the rung faster than the user climb it, right? So yesterday I heard from Air Canada that their premium badge, they were actually introduced in the middle, right? So that's an example where they introduce another set of kind of essentially a harder game in the middle as the user level up to that, right? So that's the formula to use gamification to solve big business problem. Thank you for your attention. Yeah.